willkommen in einem nachfolgenden video. Welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case part 56 of my game system design series. In this case I'll be looking at how the internet has influenced my figure gaming hobby experience. There is minimal science involved in this video. It's all about my opinion and my journey and how I've noticed how the hobby has changed because of the internet. We should all thank DARPA for creating a nuclear war-proof network back in the late 60s if you think this is a positive effect. Unless you've been living under a rock, the internet has had a major impact on all our lives since the late 1980s. Well, at least late 1980s for me because I work in the IT industry, but certainly since the 2000s for most of anyone else out there. The impact on our hobby is no exception. The initial impact that we would typically notice these days is on our gaming stores, basically the old-fashioned bricks and mortar retail outlets that have been significantly impacted by the internet. While those used to buying rules, figures and paints from a store, this could be considered as bad. On the other hand, those who have embraced the internet and have purchased a wide range of products from across the world, which would have never normally been available locally, it would be considered as good. And that, I think, has had a significant impact, particularly in the centre of Europe or in Asia. As I alluded at the beginning, for those who considered the internet's impact as good, then I suppose you would need to thank DARPA for creating a nuclear-proof network all those years ago. Another example of how atomic bombs have benefited us all. However, apart from how we actually buy our products, the internet has had other, more significant effects on our hobby. I consider these effects as generally good, but of course the one downside of the internet is sitting in a darkened room looking at your computer screen is less interactive and fun than meeting your friends at the local club. As long as you do not neglect the face-to-face interaction aspect of the hobby, then the internet's impact will be all positive. To show you what I mean about the ancillary impacts of the internet, let's look at my personal experience. I suspect my experience may be similar to many gamers who were teenagers back in the late 70s and 80s, but after becoming heavily involved in the hobby, have left the hobby to pursue real-life careers and may be coming back again to it. I, for one, was heavily in the hobby when I was single, but once I got married and had to get a job and pay the mortgage, the hobby went by the wayside. And it remained by the wayside until my company was taken over in about 2010. I found myself with less work and more free time, which was good for my hobby, but not so for my career. While sitting in one of the identical cubicles scattered across Asia Pacific, which with not much to do, I decided to investigate the figure gaming hobby scene to see what had changed and what had not. In summary, I was considering getting back into the hobby. The first project of getting back into the hobby was to identify a set of rules which I should learn, and once I had decided this, I would then bring out my figures which I'd been storing in boxes since 1986. I'm really uncertain why I decided to initially look into ancient figure gaming. Ancients were never my primary interest, even when I was young, so I'm uncertain why I went down this path now, but I quickly latched on to DBM in early 2012 and started studying the rules. I began my investigation on the internet and discovered Yahoo groups. This was the first crossover between the internet and figure gaming, and I thought it was an excellent crossover. I could download cheat sheets, game guides, and even old copies of the rules. The latter was very useful because almost every gaming shop I was previously aware of has closed. I do remember spending a lot of time and effort trying to find a replacement gaming store, particularly when I was in the US. When I was in Portland, I remember taking the light rail in Portland to Hillsborough, where there's a large hobby store in the main street. It had some gaming stuff, but it was pretty minimalistic and was primarily focused on railways and airfix models and actual real RC models, rather than actual figure gaming. But there was a small number of GHQ figures off in a corner somewhere. When I moved to Boston, I found the Hobby Bunker in Wakefield. It had much more hobby material that I was interested in, but compared to the old days was still rather bare. I also discovered why it was called the Hobby Bunker. When I saw the store entrance, it looked like the entrance to the THEORIE bunker. Incidentally, when I'm talking about gaming shops, I'm talking about figure gaming shops. There are lots of board gaming shops around that have no figures. And the Hobby Bunker actually did have a moderately good range of GHQ figures. Unfortunately, when I first discovered the stores, all the GHQ figures were off being displayed at a convention somewhere, so I didn't get a chance to look at many, but they came back and I was quite pleased. When I shifted over to San Francisco, I made a massive effort to go through every single hobby store I could find, and I dropped by quite a few stores all around the Bay Area and downtown. But while I have to admit there was some material which was useful, it was nothing like the hobby stores of the 1980s. Nonetheless, I did pick up a couple of sets of rules and some hobby guides, etc., but I suspect they were in the old boxes that no one had actually looked at for quite a few years. After my unsuccessful search for a hobby store, which I could browse through all the material I wanted, I came to the conclusion if I wanted to buy rules, I needed to do so via the internet, which I did. The internet was helpful in that as well, and I ended up getting a lot of different rules from a host of stores, most of which were in the UK. Considering at the time I was based in the US, so this was quite useful. The discovery I could download some old rules from the Yahoo group in addition, so I could investigate the rules in more detail, was actually a real godsend and assisted me greatly, because shipping rules across the Atlantic tended to be rather expensive. So after buying quite a few rules, which in the end I decided I didn't particularly like, I became a little bit more selective, and the internet allowed me to do more research. So I found Yahoo groups very useful for my study of DBM. However, once I got all the rules, army lists and all the game guides, I found trying to learn the rules from a rules book difficult. I got into the habit of creating example documents which assisted me, and I must admit there was a lot of DBM I really liked, or a lot about the rules I really liked. The issue, however, I really found, even after I learned the rules myself, was teaching opponents. In order to teach someone a set of rules, you need to know the rules backwards. Without significant gaming experience, this was almost impossible to achieve for a complex set of rules like DBM. At this point, I'd moved back to Asia Pacific, primarily Japan, so I had not re-entered the club scene in my old area, and as a result, I worked on finding people interested in figure gaming and trying to teach them the rules. By now, I had bought out two of my 15mm ancient armies. Unfortunately, it had suffered some corrosion and took me a bit of effort to ship over from my homeland, but I got it and I had to try and repair it, and I got something that was usable. Unfortunately, trying to teach someone a DBM on a kitchen table, and that person who would have limited English skills, was not particularly working very well, especially since I kept on stopping the game as I tried to work out the answers to questions which were thrown at me. The Japanese tend to be a lot like Germans, and they tend to be rather analytical, so some of the questions took me a while to actually find the rule that either said that it would go this way or that way. My other issue was, as my playing area at this time consisted of a green sheet and some felt and books, it was not providing the required level of bling to interest a typical otaku used to anime figures. Perhaps if I had a samurai army it would have worked better. All I had was Romans and Carthaginians. So in the end, my attempt to draw other players into DBM failed, and I went back to the drawing board. Back in early 2013, DBA3 was being developed, and I got involved in the rules review and playtesting process via, once again, the internet. My rules format suggestions during this process were ignored, and quite frankly I understand why my suggestions were ignored, but the whole experience allowed me to become rather proficient in DBA as I conducted a forensic analysis of the rules and really got to know them well. Unfortunately, I learnt the beta rules, and whenever I try a DBA version 3 game these days, I always get caught out with the minor changes. This is one of the issues of getting involved in rules too early. Learning DBA 3 and teaching other people how to play the games did work out a lot better. But while I was involved with this process, I discovered DBA 2.2 and WADBAG, which stands for Washington Area Debellis Aquitaneous Gamers. They published a reasonably good guide back in 2006, which was available as a download, once again from the internet, and this got me involved in DBA 2.2 gaming. I was very impressed with the guide, which is why I went from 3 back to 2. In conclusion, I discovered the internet could be used to obtain a host of supporting information which could allow players to learn how to play figure gaming. Prior to this, I got the rules book, and studying the rules book tried to work out how to play it. Now I discovered there was another method, that is, try and leverage other people's efforts in creating documentation that would assist you in learning how to play the rules. For better or worse, I found DBA, it was interesting. I enjoyed the games, but I tended to find it a little bit too abstract and simplistic for my take. So I decided to look elsewhere. And as I indicated earlier, Ancients is not really my primary focus of area or interest. It's primarily World War II and Cold War. So then I thought about looking for old rules, which I used to use back in the 1980s. And lo and behold, I found many Yahoo groups which covered these rules. Maybe I could try to teach people these rules. The main set of rules that I focused on was Corps Commander, which had a Yahoo group. I cannot remember who created the site, and he's long since disappeared from the scene, but I did converse with him when Yahoo groups were still around, and decided to flip my focus from DBA to Corps Commander. I will not bore anyone with my attempts at modifying these rules. I had lots of wild ideas and tried them, and they all failed. So in the end, I decided to ignore all modifications and decided to intensively study the rules as they were and create an extensive examples document to help me play the rules. These documents were monsters, with the Corps Commander OMG, which is the Cold War, and the World War II versions having almost 200 pages each. I also took the opportunity to incorporate all the errata into the examples, of which there was quite a bit. This was especially the case for Operational Manoeuvre Group, or the Cold War version of the rules, as this was the older set of rules. The World War II version did have a lot of the errata already built into it. In addition to my massive examples documents, I also created a host of game aids, such as extensive cheat sheets. Then when I discovered that to have a good game you had to have a really tight scenario with limited numbers of game turns, I started focusing on the game turn record tracks and providing game aids in that area. And finally, these rules required lots of game markers and counters. It was based on an SP system, so as you took losses you had to count the SPs that were left or were taken as hits, and there were lots of states out of supply, etc. So I created all those counters for the rules. And the counters and all these game aids were critical in order to speed up gameplay. While it did take me quite a while to realise this, in the end I discovered you needed to have a really tight scenario with clear victory conditions and an achievable endpoint to have actually a good game. So as a result, I started creating an extensive series of scenarios spanning a host of historical periods ranging from 1939 all the way up to 1989. Now let's come back to the internet. Of course, all the material that I was creating was posted on the Yahoo group site. Because there was a Corps Commander Yahoo group site, I actually had a much greater incentive to create game aids that would assist people in learning how to play a game and playing it, because I could now post it to a site. Now, I did consider posting all this on Facebook, but quickly dropped that as the Facebook interface was horrible and it's not really designed for sharing of PDF files. I also did look at Google Groups, and while better than Facebook, it offered no real benefits over Yahoo Groups and was more difficult to configure into a usable form. So I thought I'd achieved the ultimate forum experience, but unfortunately, while I was back in the US, Seattle, back in 2017, Yahoo Groups started to implode and I had to look for alternatives. One of the people who developed the original Yahoo Groups left Yahoo several years prior and created a group called IO Groups, which was supposed to be an alternative to Yahoo Groups. I finally decided to create a IO Groups for Corps Commander and my own quick play version of the game in June 2018, and I started migrating the various files over to the IO group site. While I had earlier attempted to modify Core Commander to sort of twist it into the vision that I wanted, I abandoned all that entirely. However, one of the projects that I did undertake was to try and create a quick play version of the original rules. The original Core Commander is an incredibly complex set of rules. It actually, if you learn it properly, it's more akin to a training manual for a NATO commander or regimental commander than something that you could use as a game. So I wanted to create a simpler version of it. Tried many attempts, and finally on my version 6 I came out with something that was, probably sped up play by a factor of 2. It was still very complex, but it did at least speed up play by a factor of 2. And that was actually the original set of rules that I posted on IO groups in May 2018. Shortly after this, it became clear Yahoo Group was fully self-destructing. I decided to move other set sites over to the IO group site, LWRS rules in particular, which is still being managed by the original author, Andrew Stevenson, has been growing slowly, but it's been growing slowly, but it has been growing. I can incidentally highly recommend the rules to anyone, as they're very playable and easy to learn. But because Yahoo Groups was collapsing, I didn't want to lose the content that was physically on Yahoo Groups, so I convinced Andrew to port his site over to Yahoo Groups, which he agreed, and so that got saved as well. As with Core Commander, I also created my own version of LWRS, but unlike Core Commander, I made no changes. It was simply a format change. So prior to me moving LWRS over to IO Groups, I had fully reformatted the rules, called it Bewegungskrieg, posted it to the IO Groups in May 2018, along with my quick play version of Core Commander. As indicated, these are the same rules as LWRS. They're simply formatted into a standard case system with cross-referencing. And the rules come in 3 formats, 1 column 12 point, 2 column 10 point, and 3 column 8 point. The reason why I do these 3s is because some players have eyesight issues, they need 12 point, and other players want the shortest, quickest set of rules possible, so I go for 8 point. And of course there's someone in between. Now, of course, along with these, I also created, as I did with Core Commander, examples, cheat sheets, scenarios, and a host of other playing aids. And all the game aids can be reused with the original rules if you don't like the reformatted version of the rules. This got ported also to the IO Groups. I had a small gap at this point, but then Yahoo Groups announced all files will be lost on their site. So at that point I decided that I needed to save as many of the good Yahoo Groups that I could, along with their supporting files. I started with BGMR in November 2019, which are probably a set of rules which are the state of the art for squad scale and is possibly the endpoint of the whole WRG rules up to Challenger sort of sequence. I think BGMR is kind of the development of that. I also need to thank Gordon Dunn, who assisted me in saving the World War II versions of the rules. The site is possibly my most popular saved site. After BGMR, I then saved the Command Decision site in March 2020. There's not many sites or files, but the original Yahoo Groups mailing list link is included, and that's actually quite useful for players of Command Decision. Then I decided to save the BBWW2B files, or Bloody Big World War II Battles files. This site is managed by the author of those set of rules, Bob McKenzie, and I personally feel the basic rules that he had posted on the Bloody Big Battle Yahoo group are very good, simple and fun. Bob also has his own site. The link to it is in this group. I also saved the old Wargamers Digest rules posted on Yahoo Groups in July 2019. I called it KRIEGSSPIEL Zusammenfassung. The rules printed in the magazine were not complete, so I filled in the gaps and created a possible final version of what the rules may have looked like if they were actually ever published. I did like these rules when they first came out in the Wargamers Digest magazine, and while not complete, I used them with my 172 Airfix tanks and figures and enjoyed them greatly. There were also a number of smaller Yahoo group sites which I saved and placed in a single IO group site. In this case, Schwerpunkt and Stonk. My figure game version of the SPI Modern Battle board game is also contained here. I also saved a number of other Ancients and Napoleonics rules and placed it on a different IO group site I originally created for TOEs. My figure game version of the SPI Napoleonic War board game and SPI Pre-Stag Ancients board game is contained here as well. After saving as many Yahoo groups as I could, I then decided to create an IO group for a very old set of rules popular in Australia and New Zealand back in the 1970s and 80s, which managed to find its way to Europe somehow. I suspect it may have something to do with the Tin Soldier Company. Unfortunately, IO groups at this point no longer offered free storage after September 2020, I think from memory. So the rules have to be accessed by the links provided in this IO group. I also saved an old set of Napoleonic rules. The original rules I saved was based on DBA, and I thought I would ensure they were always available for future historians by posting it here. From memory, I only had a few games using these rules, and from memory they kind of seemed to work. I'm not quite sure. I only discovered these rules by accident going through some old files, so they could have been lost forever. I also posted a version of a set of Napoleonic rules. I mean, I've posted a few other versions of different Napoleonic rules on this site as well. After the frenzy of trying to save as many rules as I could, and I have to admit a lot of good materials lost for good, which was really quite sad, I went back to learning rules, getting all my figures out, rebasing them and painting up new figures. My other focus was also creating good looking playing areas, which became increasingly a main focus area for me. It took me many years to finally get it right, or at least something that made me happy, and I think actually it's an aspect of the hobby that is generally ignored. The hobby or figure gaming is all about bling, and getting good playing area and also good basing is actually all part of the bling. And I quickly learnt this because once you set up a lovely playing area with quite realistic terrain, good basing and lots of features, etc., people get really excited at the rules, and one of my main focuses has been to get new players back into the hobby. While I was engaged in all these different pursuits, saving Yahoo groups and creating my playing areas, I started looking at YouTube for supporting information. This began with creating terrain and basing figures. After a gap of 20 years, I had forgotten how I based my figures and had to relearn the skill. While I find a lot of useful info on YouTube concerning terrain and figure painting and basing, I surprisingly did not find very much useful material on learning rules. I have to admit there were some useful videos, such as the short videos for DBN, which are quite good, but most of the videos were very long example games. I did watch one, but there was a lot of nothing occurring during a lot of the video, as the videos were live. And often when players did something, it was not explained clearly what was happening. Basically, it was like a game of tennis, except a game of tennis which lasted for 6 hours. However, I have to admit there were quite a few videos for popular rules such as DBN, and while I can criticise some of them, at least there was something, but many rules had absolutely nothing out there. It was then, while I was being forced to take a corporate CBT training course on my computers, I realised you could create videos on rules in a similar manner. So my YouTube experience started. In June 2019, I created my first YouTube video. I started with the German versions, but quickly flipped to English. Initially, I used an artificial voice, but after several complaints, I moved to a human voice. Since June 2019, I've created a host of videos, but there are two main streams. A game design theory stream, which is really what this video is part of, which is focused on rule mechanics to a large extent, and the second is game hints, which is focused on terrain, painting, basing, associated topics. And actually this video could have actually existed in either of those groups, but I decided to put it in the game design theory group. I've also created a bunch of historical videos which quite frankly I used to assist me in scenario creation, which ended up being a major part of my hobby efforts. I also created an extensive series of training videos on a number of rules. These are very boring, but if you are interested in learning rules, or those rules, they can be quite useful. After a run-in with the YouTube algorithm, I also created a duplicate bitchute site. I do not promote the site and only use it as a backup, but amazingly enough, I do get some subscribers. Weirdly enough, YouTube considered that I was a hate crime person because I had a link in there to a set of rules, wargaming rules. So YouTube's algorithm, let's just say it's not a particularly advanced or intelligent algorithm. Since I started posting videos, I've noticed more and more people are posting videos themselves. The DBMM group in Hong Kong has created some rather good videos on how to play DBMM, which I find quite useful. Another example which I look at possibly less so, but nonetheless I find it a good example, is Great War Spearhead. There are many other larger YouTubers, but what I'm noticing is if the site is monetized, it focuses on popular topics which are entertaining but do not provide me with really new information, which is what I'm interested in. Thus, I tend to focus on the smaller YouTubers who are not monetized and who are posting based on a desire to expand the hobby. The internet has had a significant impact on the hobby. While there are negative effects, such as causing the old gaming stores to die, in the most part, there are many positive effects as well. No matter where you are, you can obtain any kind of figure from any place in the world, which I have to admit is a very positive impact. In addition to figures, you can obtain any set of rules from anywhere in the world, and in many cases in PDF format. In addition to commercially available rules, many people have posted their freeware rules on the internet, some of which are rather good. LWRS is actually a good example of a very good set of micro-armor sets of rules, and Andrew Stevenson's also created a fairly good set of Napoleonic rules as well. The internet has allowed gamers to join global communities by using forums such as IO Group, Temp and Wargamers Forum, and this allows them to obtain yet additional game aids and materials to enhance their hobby experience. You can also go to YouTube to get hints on how to create your armies, how to base them, how to create terrains, how to learn rules, and also give you an idea of how the rules play by looking at example games. All of this does not replace club games, competition games, and games at your friend's home, but it does supplement it greatly. Of course, one of the interesting downsides is choice. When you enter this hobby, this can be rather daunting. That unfortunately can only be resolved with effort and research and helpful advice from friends. Although you can still fall back on the old-fashioned way of getting into the hobby, going to a club and basically playing what everyone else is playing. And so we come to an end of my whimsical video, in this case part 56 of my game system design series, and in this case analysing the impact of the internet on the figure gaming, wargaming hobby. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.